Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Should Have Listened to My Mother can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, so please be sure to mention it to your friends or rate it. I've never asked anyone to rate my show, but it helps. And if you like it, it's fantastic. And I hear back from a lot of guests, so I really, really appreciate that. My guest is definitely not a woe is me kind of gal. In fact, she's the complete antithesis. A few of Sylvia Beckerman's mantras include persevere, don't just survive. Have a purpose, big or small, even if it's just a smile. Sylvia is the host and creator of the podcast Sylvia and Me, Conversations with Extraordinary, Inspiring Women. She's also the founder and CEO of two organizations created to help empower women. While raising two children on her own, she weathered not one but two divorces. Sylvia began the support group Apres Divorce, and because of the hundreds of conversations she had with traumatized women regarding not only divorce but finances, personal gain, and more, she moved on to Life Apres, offering conversations with answers. And après is French word for after. She loves to promote and empower women, and she's learned on her own how to advocate for herself. She's the oldest of 5 children. Both parents were hard workers. Her mom was 20 years old when Sylvia was born. Her mother was 40 years young when she applied for her PhD. Sylvia Beckerman, it's a pleasure to speak with you on Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Well, Jackie, thank you so much for having me. I think this is going to be very interesting.
It's amazing what comes out in these 30-minute conversations. It's really kind of interesting. In the past, you moved around a bit. When your boys were younger, you've had a very successful career. You had some issues in the marriage department, which you seem to have settled, but I'd like to get a little bit of an inkling of what more of that home life. The oldest of 5 kids, I'm assuming you were kind of the second mom, a surrogate mom to your siblings?
Well, I was a babysitter. I wasn't a surrogate mom. I wouldn't go that far. I never thought of that as a description. But back in the day, it was $1 for someone over, I think, 10 to go to the movies and 50 cents for anyone else. And I would take my siblings, my mother would drop us off if she had something that all 5 of us couldn't go to. And I was the one who was, in quotes, responsible. But other than that, I never really thought, you brought up an interesting term. I never thought of mothering. I babysat. I watched.
Well, good for you. That's your first career.
For watching siblings, you don't get paid. But that's just part of being the oldest. And within 8 years, my mom had 5 children. So it wasn't a question that, the age gap was 8 years between myself and my youngest brother.
Yeah, so you're all very close in age, which makes it kind of easier because there's that commonality there. So your mom and dad worked?
Well, my dad worked. He had a dry cleaning store, so he worked 6 days a week, sometimes, 12-hour days. My mom did not work until, she worked because any mother who is a stay-at-home mom works their butt off. She got married. I grew up, I was born in the 50s, and in the 50s, it was a little bit different. It's not like it was, it is today. So she stayed home with us, taking care of us until we were all out of the house. And I would say that was when she was in her 40s. My father grew up also with the notion that women stayed home and took care of the family, which was a big undertaking for 5 children. And when we moved it out to the suburbs in the early 60s, again, it was exactly what you were supposed to do.
Were your parents, did they have a great relationship? Were they in love?
They were in love. They had a typical relationship. They loved each other. They cared about each other, and they basically almost grew up together. Is it difficult having 5 children? Sure.
Yes.
I couldn't imagine it. 2 was my max, considering the fact that with my luck, I would have another boy. Not that I don't love my boys. And luckily, I do have one who likes shopping as much as I do, or shoes. For him, it's sneakers. But, 5 children was a handful. But my mother wanted to do more. And it's funny because as we were growing up, no, she wasn't out working and getting paid. She was working in the house. But one of the things that she was very insistent on, if she saw something that wasn't right, she voiced it. And, one of the things that just stays in my head was that school was never closed back then on the Jewish holidays. Now, mind you, I'm not saying my mother's responsible for what wound up taking place, but she didn't think it was right. Not only that they were open, but they gave us homework. And sure enough, I found my mother at the school because she was voicing what she thought was not proper. It wasn't that she was specifically asking for schools to be closed, but no homework, not missing out. So it was those type of things that she was very adamant about. She was very passionate about. She also, something
that many of us don't even ever think of. I mean, I'm Christian, and we always have the big holidays off. So naturally, I assumed anyone else. Now we have many holidays, right?
Yes, you do.
Right. So the fact welcome. That you even mentioned that, yeah. Oh wait, what? Your mom's name? What's your mom's name?
Anita Beckerman.
And how did you refer to your mom?
Mommy. I still call her Mommy, even though she's not with us. And I still call my dad, who passed away August 31st, was 7 years, and I called him Daddy. So no matter how old I am, and my children call me Mommy.
I love it. I really do. And I want to shout out to Anita, Mommy, and thank her for voicing what some of us take for granted, these issues of religious equality. That took a lot for her to go and do that out of her busy day.
As I said, she was passionate about certain things. And because she didn't let things stop her. I remember a story my father used to tell when they first met. She was living in Connecticut. She grew up in Connecticut and New Haven. And when my father asked her out, he asked her to a dance, and my mother did not know how to dance. Well, unbeknownst to my father, she went and took dance lessons. She didn't grow up with any money. In fact, she grew up with a single mom. Her dad had passed away when she was about 4. And my mother went and learned how to dance so that when she went and saw my father just a few weeks later, she knew how to dance. And she was very good at it.
Wow. That's taking initiative, I'd say. My goodness. And what kind of relationship, if any, did you have with your maternal grandmother, your mom's mom?
Oh, my Bubby. My Bubby was about 40. She was in her 40s when she had my mother. And we lived in Long Island, in Manhasset Hills, New Hyde Park, when we finally did move from Queens. And we saw my grandmother at least once a month. We drove to New Haven. I know that it was always 15 minutes on 95 between each of the tolls. It took an hour and a half. And my grandmother was someone you didn't want to, as was my mother. We know where she got it from, but you didn't want to go up against, because my grandmother had what one would call a hard life. We'd call it that now. But again, she persevered. She raised my mom. She raised my uncle was 14 years older than my mother. She had a daughter. She had a son who passed away at my mother never met him. So she worked, and she worked hard, and she had her own voice. There was always an argument when we take my grandmother out to eat about who was paying the bill. Now, my grandmother didn't have any money, but, it got towards the end where my mother made arrangements for my mother to pay the bill.
Give me the check.
Right. She was as stubborn as my mother was, but not in a bad way. Wow. As I said, she was very focused, and so much so that where it really made a huge impact on me many, many years later was at the age of, it was in her early 40s. She had never been able to go to college because they couldn't afford it. And she enrolled in the new school, which was one of the first, it was accredited, that gave you credit for life experience. And from there, within 8 years, my mother had gotten her PhD from Columbia.
But it wasn't, she had to try. They were poo-pooing her, right?
For going in, for applying to Columbia. Oh, yes. Whatever they called him back then, her advisor. Of course, he was a man, and he told my mother, why is she even trying between her age and whatnot? She's not going to be able to pass the test. Well, lo and behold, no, the first time she did not. But then she took the next few weeks, studied every single test that was out there. And when she went in, not only did she pass, but she got something like 100 points higher. Oh. And, the guy was flabbergasted.
Oh, good for her.
Yeah.
So wait, so she had gotten her undergrad from the new school and then the PhD from Columbia. In what? What did she study?
I believe it's geriatrics and administration, because in between she went to Pace College and became a nurse. She studied nursing.
Wow. So this is in your blood, generational inspiration and fortitude.
Yes, fortitude is one of those things. But I look at my mother, she's the one who gave me the model to go after. It had a lot to do with her persistence and her perseverance when they sold their house. And at the same time, I moved to, where am I? I moved to Connecticut. Back in 1989, they moved to Florida. She became a professor. Her specialty was geriatrics. She taught nursing. And it's funny because when she was in hospice back in 2013, one of the things, my sister also became a nurse. One of the things that my sister was insistent on, because my mother had been insistent on when she taught nursing, when a doctor or a nurse walks into a room, whether you think the person is in a coma, can hear you or not, you introduce yourself, you give them respect, and you tell them what you're going to be doing. So that kind of instilled in all of us, specifically in me, because I can only talk about me, but I see it in my siblings, that you need to be present. You can't just assume that you can walk in a room without an introduction, without specifying why you're here, what you want to do. And that really comes back to who you are and how you think about yourself, and not treating others with disrespect.
Right. It's a mutual respect. I was curious, as you were talking about your sister, did your younger siblings benefit as much as you did from the life lessons your mom chose to instill in you? Or they internalized it differently, or it rubbed off the same?
I don't think it rubbed off the same. It rubbed off in different ways. They all have some of my mother in them. but they started careers and stuck to them for years. In fact, they all, and my brother, they all retired after 40 years of nursing, 30 some odd years of being the CEO at a facility in Massachusetts. My brother worked for the IRS for 30 some odd years. In their work ethic and their tenacity and, in their personal lives, everyone has a part of my mother in them. I started showing it really as I got to be in my 50s, and then more so in my 60s.
It's pretty great, and obviously your parents were, I'm assuming, a team, right? They're on the same page.
Not for everything. I mean, I don't think many people are. Love is bliss and happily ever after. I don't think that exists.
No, I'm not talking about bliss and all that, up your head up in the clouds. I'm just talking about ethically, morally.
Yes.
They were on the same page. And it makes a huge difference, because I find the more people I talk to, the family wasn't always cohesive.
No, they really set a standard, and it was as far as, work ethic and respect for people and really moving on. In fact, my mother had co-authored a book when she was teaching. It Takes More Than Love, a practical guide to taking care of an aging adult. That was in her field. And also there was so much that she wanted to really put out there and let people know and give people hope and a voice. And it was pretty neat. She also had left a fantastic 5-star review for her book on Amazon. We tried telling her, Mom, but you don't sign your name to it. It was great. I mean, that's
brilliant.
That's who she was.
Anita.
That's Anita, Dr. Beckerman. My father was always proud to hear, when she was introduced, and he'd go, "It's Dr. Beckerman," because she earned it.
That's right, Dr. Beckerman. How wonderful is that? So related to what you were just talking about, your mom, the gifts that she had given to others and what she was trying to instill in the industry of caregiving, you have actually turned that around, and that's exactly what you're doing with now Life Apres, and what you originally had started with Apres Divorce. So why don't you share a little bit about that? And if we have time for you to tell the email story from, I believe, is your second ex-husband.
Yes. Well, there's one thing I do want to mention. Because my mother started when she was older than most people doing, she had a lot of women come up to her. And this is what made a big difference in how I approached things and why I did it at the stage that I did it. Women would call her up and say, I really want to go to grad school. I really want to do this. I really want to do that. And she'd say, well, why aren't you? Oh, I'm 60. I really, too old. And my mother would just say, she didn't curse, but she'd basically tell them to get the heck off the phone and go do what you want to do. It's never too late. And that's kind of how I wound up thinking that, without even thinking it, I realized afterwards that I didn't start Apres Divorce until I was in my 60s. And I didn't do Life Apres until I was, of course, I was 67. Life Apres. And so it's never too late. And the thing that got me started was the fact that my ex would not do the last piece to give me back my email address that I'd had for over 20 years.
I mean, you must have been in shock. I know you dealt with all of this years ago, but it's not only childish, it's offensive and immature behavior, and one's email can really be a lifeline to so many.
To me, it was, please, he just got me angry.
Right.
But for some people, it could be their whole identity. And that's what got
Absolutely.
me thinking. It's the little things that we think are too small to talk about. We think other people have larger issues that we don't say anything. And what we're doing is we're really depriving people of being able to acknowledge things that touch them, that could be a trauma they've gone through, that they think, there are so many larger traumas in life that, theirs is too minor to even talk about.
And that's very important, what you're saying right now. And I don't mean to minimize anything, because those small things, like you said, can be traumatic.
And that's really why I started it. Well, I started it when I realized I didn't have any silverware to cut a piece of cheese to have with my wine, because I'd given everything to charity when I sold my house and moved in with my ex at that, my soon to be ex at that time, and I went to Bed Bath & Beyond and registered for my divorce. I had a little party. I came up with the name Apres Divorce. I had the web people that I'd been working with come up with a logo, got a website because I was doing something else, and immediately switched it over. And I really had no total goal. I didn't have this big business plan. I didn't have this big goal. All I knew was that there were things that people wanted to talk about. Why not just a fun, easy time chatting? Whether you talk about finances or sex or image building or, legality or, empty nester or, any of those, how to move on.
Did you ever have little voices inside your head saying, I don't know about this, maybe you shouldn't do this?
Not really. But to me, it was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. People will come, they won't come. Will I be less known? Will I be more known? I don't care. And what happened was there were about 30 people at this particular event. And it was great. And then I realized, it was a launch party and it was a party. And then I tried one as a panel discussion. I thought, ooh, this is really not great. It's too formal. And I never did that again. We always had wine and appetizers and had it at various different places, different topics. And it just opened up a world to me, which then opened up a world to some other people. And that's how, from there I started the podcast, because I had people from all over asking me, did you tape this? How can I listen to it? I didn't even know what a podcast was. I got myself a microphone. First person I interviewed was Candace Leitner, the founder of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, back in the 80s. And from there, it's been a passion without even realizing it. It's been great. I get to meet people like you and be on your show.
That's pretty great. All over the world.
Well, that's it.
All over the world.
That's it. It's the only good thing that came out of the pandemic was the fact that people were, shuttered, and I could wind up, I did end up speaking to people all over the world. A very diverse group of women. And it's been great. It's been fun. And it's been really satisfying just getting an email back. Oh, you've given women a platform, a voice. And without even realizing it, it's a passion of mine. Let's put it that way.
So it's lifeapres.com is where people can find you,
Yep.
right? And your podcast is called Sylvia and Me.
Yeah. No, I was saying, spent all night trying to come up with a name. Yeah. Right. What can I tell you?
Well, you are your best friend, I hope, right? So you and your subconscious chatting and work. Did you ever get your email back?
Oh, no, I knew I wasn't going to. I'd already had another email. But it just, it made me so angry, which is fine because look what it turned into. It was just such a do the
See
thing.
that? That's another lesson. When we have these obstacles, you have to kind of let your intuition work with it for a while. It always seems to get us somewhere down the line in a better
Yes,
place.
it does.
Sylvia Beckerman, this has been really magical. And your mom, Dr. Anita Beckerman, it's really been a pleasure sharing these stories with all of my listeners.
Thank you for letting me tell my story about me and my mom to all of your listeners.
Podcast again, Sylvia and me, and lifeapres.com if anyone wants to reach out to Sylvia. I am Jackie Tantillo, and we will be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.